So I'm going to try to describe it. It's very vague. It's very vague because it's different every time.
Okay.
But the person I'm working with will show up and we'll spend a couple minutes doing like a mindfulness exercise and, body scan, just kind of getting a baseline of where they're at. And then we'll set...
This was private?
Yeah, it's private. Although I have done, small groups and classes and things like that. But today was just one-on-one. And then I'll have them set an intention for their session, which is basically their time that they spend with the horses.
That's a big thing. Even like yoga is like setting an intention.
Yeah.
Like having purpose, I think something about it just instead of just like, going through something. Like if you're going to go work out, you're like, well, I'm just lifting stuff. Or like, what's your intention? Okay, I want to work on upper body. Or, like it's something about that. Maybe it's psychology. Like then you actually try more if you have an intention.
I think it helps focus. The thing that I think it helps the most with is that the rest of the dynamics of what happens in the session illuminate things about the intention or support the intention.
Okay.
And I know you said you're not very spiritual, but so there's a concept that if you have a clear intention that the universe is going to support you when you're clear about it.
Okay. Like putting it out there. Like you say like right now, like, all right, I'm going to be a chemist, and you just like, boom. And so there's a lot of either acceptance or pushback that actually happens when you put something out there, the world will give it to you. So, but
the elements of the session, which are, the horses and their behavior and myself and the other animals that are around, the wildlife, the weather, everything plays a part in the rest of the session. And the things that I can observe about those elements and the way they kind of weave together through the session have information around the person's intention that helps them get whatever they needed out of the session or the next piece to their puzzle or a perspective shift that they needed or a solution, something, whatever, it depends.
Okay.
Because I've had people that have intentions, anything from, I'll have someone go in and say, well, I really need to have a sense of peace right now. So I just want to go in and feel peaceful with the horses. And I've had someone else go in and say, hey, I have to work this afternoon and I have to have this really difficult conversation with my coworker. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I want to go in and this is what my session is going to be about. I need to figure out how to have this difficult conversation with this coworker. Like
the horse is like, just do it. It needs all up in her face. It can be vague
to specific. Yeah. It just depends. But it does sort of direct how the pieces fall into place as the session unfolds.
Okay.
Around that. So the intention is really important.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could see like maybe with direction. Sure. I'd have to like see it. Like I understand where you're coming from, but like it's...
Yeah, I usually tell people you either just need to take the plunge and experience a session, or you need to sit and listen to me like tell specific stories about sessions, like the actual stories, because then you're like, oh, now I get it. So you set an intention and then you go in and spend time with the horses. It's not riding or anything. It's just the horses are at liberty. They're just loose. They can walk around or run around or ignore you or interact with you, whatever they want. They're responding to the energy that's you're present with, that's present in you. And I observe what's going on. I may or may not check in or interject. Just depends on what's happening with the client and sort of unfolds how it unfolds. And I know that's really vague, but
because every experience can't be summarized.
It's not, and it's so different. But as things are unfolding, I might be offering suggestions or observations or sharing something or asking a question that seems pertinent or something. And I'm also asking the client to share what they're experiencing as things are unfolding. And that's relevant to what they're going through too. And so little by little, the pieces fall into place. And then by the end, more often than not, we have something around their intention, some next piece or next step or some conclusion or feeling of coming full circle or something like that, cool. And then we kind of spend a couple minutes like verbalizing it so that they have something they can take away and digest or enjoy or whatever it is that they need.
So I had this theory, and it's funny, like I thought of this earlier, but like you were talking and the conversation flowed into another. And again, you have an overwhelming positive feedback on this. You generally don't have a lot of people that don't get something from it.
I don't know if I've ever had someone who didn't get something from it.
So I'm going to say this in frame of something else. I'm going to particularly talk about horoscope. Do you like and or know much about horoscope? Like Libra, all this stuff?
A little bit, but I'm not a huge
Do you put much weight into it?
follower.
Not a big fan? Or do you ever go like, oh, well, that's why we're meshing because, we're both Libras? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to it than that.
Okay, yeah. So literally, I thought of this earlier, and this applies to maybe some religions. It applies to a lot of things, and I think I just brought my train of thought back to it, where sometimes these ideas or spiritualities can put confirmation bias to things, and so I always wonder if that's the underlying thing that's being abused in like anything. We're talking like even. Also, another reference to this is there's a show called Disenchanted for any of the Netflix or Hulu watchers. I think it's on Hulu. Okay. Do you know Futurama?
I know of it. I haven't watched it very much.
So one of the guys that was a director in that, he made this new one called Disenchanted. But in one of the episodes, they were basically at what would be a freak show, an old classic one, where it was just all these oddities. And one of them was the Egyptian woman in the box with the cards that come out. And she could talk. And so it was like almost cheesily showing confirmation bias that like the character was already convinced that he like loved her even though she was just the head.
Yeah.
And so all the cards that came out, he swayed into like, oh, this means we're meant to be together.
Yeah.
And she was just not having it. She's like, I'm just a head, I can't. And then so all this stuff, she was like, all right, well, I'll start spitting out these cards. And it was like death, decapitation, despair, and it started being all this stuff, and then like one of them was an outlier and it said colorful or something, and so he was like, yes, yeah, and like so he like ignored all those, but the one confirmation bias. And so sometimes I get worried that like confirmation bias like dominates these thoughts, like horoscope, for example. Like you could see, you're like, I don't know if I really like that person, or maybe there's something about that person, and then the old school, like, I don't know, maybe this is probably like more 20 years ago, like, what's your name, what's your sign, and then from there you can like, you have a precursor, like, okay, well, like, I already know I might not be really good friends with you because you're a Scorpio,
Yes.
And so I feel like you're setting on confirmation bias, and it was hilarious because I literally saw, I'm gonna like vague it down because it's a little not safe for work, but essentially it was a tweet about this guy he was following this girl on Twitter, and she was a big horoscope fan. Like one of those, and there's so many aspects of horoscope that's like crazy. Like you could look at the thing and they'll be like, Libras are X. You look at it and you go, yeah, I'm kind of most of that to an extent, but there's some outliers. But, I think like 75% is pretty good. So maybe, this stuff does make sense, but you're also inadvertently confirmation bias. And so he followed this girl on Twitter for like a week and then said that he was a Libra, so that like they were meant together, and then basically they were like a couple and like had sex, and then he broke up with her, and he was like how did he break it down? I'm trying to like generalize. Okay, so he was like, oh, I said I was a Libra and I wasn't, and I'm actually a Scorpio. And then he was like, I know all this horoscope stuff doesn't mean anything. It's because you're all replying to his tweet saying that's something a Scorpio would do. And he's like, I'm not even a Scorpio, I'm a Capricorn. So he's like, it completely defeats your confirmation bias.
Yeah.
And I was like, literally just like, it's crazy how like we're having a conversation about that. And I preface this by saying that like what they're doing might not fall victim of it, because even if you go into something with confirmation bias, you can still have a negative experience. Or like I could be like, oh, here's all the things that Libras are generally, like shy, timid, social, whatever. And then like there's 3 of the 10 points that don't vibe, and you're like, well, see, I'm not a Libra because I'm none of those, so you can find negative and the positive. But the confirmation bias also applies to like the runes and like all that stuff. I think sometimes
it does, absolutely. So
whenever, even Janet, for the listeners, somebody that we do yoga with, she'll start a yoga session with an intent. Do you want to like just get your mind off things? And I think like once you do that, and you, whatever the process does to you at the end, you like feel like you achieved it because you already had like your confirmation bias set. And so like it's something that I start to notice with religion. I don't know, you picking up what I'm putting down?
Yes. Does that negate the experience though?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And like I said, it doesn't mean that the experience wasn't true or like it didn't. I don't know. I'm curious, like literally that was the confirmation bias, is he broke everybody's confirmation bias because he said he was a Scorpio. Yeah. Or he lied about being a Libra, and then he was like, I'm really a Scorpio. And then they're like, oh, well, they're, what's the word for that? When you trick somebody, there's a more politically correct word. that trickery, like it begins with a D. Deception, like you're deceptive. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you tricked her in order to, you know, have a hookup. And it was like, that's something a Scorpio would do. And he was like, this is how I know this is all a lie, because I'm a Capricorn and it might not even be one of their things. And then literally people were talking about that in the thread, and they were like, this is weird because horoscopes definitely probably very complex, because like, you know, we're the same horoscope. I mean, we have the same birthday. So, but in a way, we're entirely different people.
Yeah.
You know, like there might be some underlying stuff where like, oh, well, maybe we're shy and social. Cool. Like we got half of it, you know?
Yeah.
Now, is it confirmation bias or is it a coincidence? And then also someone was like, well, what about twins? When people are twins and they're like completely different people. Like one's the really nice, like person who donates to charity, and the person's like in jail. And they're like, oh, so you're telling me that Libras can also be like awful sinner crooks, and then the other ones can be like saints that work for free and do all this stuff for charity. So it's like, how do you explain that in horoscope?
Right.
Not a professional, and I'm
Right.
sure there's going to be some people out there that's just going to tear this conversation apart while they're listening to it.
That's
But-
okay. They're not here.
Yeah, but I'm also wondering, like, is there some confirmation bias in there? And I wonder if that's what the intent is, kind of, okay, so if you go in wanting this and then somehow you've arrived at that destination, the journey is just being confirmed with your bias, you know? But I mean, even if that's the case, as long as you're successful, but I wonder if you could pull anything out of anything. If you could be like, oh, well, today I'm going to have a good day, and it could be absolutely awful, but someone could buy your lunch, and you could be like, yes, like I decided that I wanted to have a good day.
Yeah.
And one thing, you know, it might not, but
I definitely think there's some of that